Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Hire Great People webinar. So today we're going to be exploring the cost of hiring mistakes, the value of getting recruitment right, and some of the lessons that we can take from world-class performers and organizations about building great teams. So as we go through today's discussion, feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat or the Q&A button. Flag if there's any issues. All should be working, but obviously we're at the whim of technology as usual. We shall be sharing a free copy of Simon's Value of Hiring Guide with everyone who attends today, so keep an eye out for that afterwards. Now, before we get into today's discussion, I want to give a bit of context on why I'm so pleased that Simon's agreed to join us. I've known him for a number of years now through leadership events, workshops, and the work we've done together at Headstar. And for those that haven't come across Simon before, he is the founder of Be World Class. He's a globally respected sports psychology consultant, performance coach, award-winning professional speaker, and author of many, many books on performance and leadership. I love them particularly because he takes an idea and he doesn't just pad it out into a massive, great book. He makes it really digestible, really relevant, and really practical. So look up his books if you haven't already. Over the last 3 decades, he's worked with Olympians, championship-winning sports teams, and global organizations like Adidas to understand what genuinely drives high performance and sustained success. So, Simon, before we talk specifically about recruitment, I wanted to start with a bigger question for you, and in the nicest possible way. What on earth first got you interested in understanding exactly what it is that separates high performers from everyone else?
Yeah, it started as I was at and then left university. And having studied sports psychology and sports science, I then went into a world where I was working with elite performers. And I had to very quickly figure out what made the difference, because all of a sudden it couldn't just be theory for me or them. I had to find out what worked. And so I became really curious about how people perform at their best consistently, what separates the very, very best world-class performers, teams, leaders, and organizations from the rest, and how we can go about engineering performance. So that was my kind of induction, if you like, into the world of high performance and elite sport.
And we want to get into some of the numbers, I guess, here as well. What with us being into finance, but probably a lot of people on the webinar aren't necessarily in finance, so I won't make that assumption. But would you say it's fair to say that most organizations still underestimate just how important recruitment is to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And quite honestly, many organizations, I think, see recruitment as like an HR process, which requires a lot of box ticking. There's a lot of compliance wrapped around it. And I absolutely get that. I really do understand that. But what they seem to be missing is the awareness, the understanding of how much impact every single hire has, every single person in their organization has on their overall performance, on their culture, and on their success. I think it became a bit of a cliche a few years ago that our people are our greatest asset. And I don't think everybody lives that principle. Not every organization really lives that principle and embraces the fact that everybody does have a huge impact on the success of this organization.
So I guess most leaders, they're going to know that a bad hire is frustrating, aren't they? But we did some research into this and have done over the years about the numbers that involves, and some of that research suggests that replacing that poor hire is going to cost up to 5 times their annual salary once you factor in recruitment costs, lost productivity, management team, and then the wider business impact is obviously a little bit harder to always quantify. But when you hear that sort of statistic, does it ring true from what you've seen? And actually, where do those costs really come from?
Yeah, this I think is a really interesting exercise to start unpiecing what makes up this cost. I often start sessions by asking people, what's the cost of a bad hire? And initially, people will start to describe all of those elements. So we've got recruitment fees, possibly. We've got the time and effort that it takes to get somebody through the door in the first place, from advertising a position through the recruitment process, making the offer, all that sort of stuff. Then we've got induction, we've got training. We will probably invest quite a lot of time into them. So they understand that bit because it's probably quite clear. And that element of it's not particularly difficult to wrap numbers around. You know, we might have some lines in a P&L that tell us that sort of stuff. But when we get beyond that, it becomes a bit more difficult. So people also understand that there's usually an element of the salary that we pay them over the course of probably months, maybe even more than 12 months, that we're also not going to see back. But people find it quite difficult to quantify exactly what that might be. So if they get some performance from the person, it's not 100% of their salary, but it'll be a percentage. And this is where I think research becomes really useful. We found a study that suggests 60%, up to 60% of performance can be degraded over the course of 9 months. So you're going to lose 60% of productivity from a person. And if we start to model that around kind of an average person, so a £45,000 a year, lower to middle manager in an organization, if we start to think, well, what might that cost end up being? We're talking probably £20,000 worth, at least, in lost productivity. But then when we start to get a little bit further than that and ask, well, what's the impact on the team around them then? How much productivity do you lose from the team immediately around that person? That becomes a really interesting question, and one that's slightly more difficult to quantify. But again, fortunately, there's some research that gives us an insight into that. Now, the research we drew on was conducted in 2017, so pre-COVID, when most people were in a physical office space. And it looked at the impact that one underperformer has on the people immediately around them. Now immediately around was within a 25-foot kind of radius of that person. And in an office setting, you're likely to get 5 or 6 people within that sort of radius. And research suggests that you lose kind of 9 or 10% productivity from each of those people in that team over the course of the time where your underperformer influences them. Now you start to see that actually that's going to add up really quickly. That ongoing cost is going to start eating away at your organization over time. Then when you start to think about another step on and ask the question, well, if they're having a negative impact on the team around them, what's the likelihood that one of your good people is going to leave? Because that could end up costing you in more ways than one. And interestingly, the research suggests that people, if one person leaves, everybody else in that team is 10% more likely to leave. And that with each one of those comes a cost. And if you think that your replacement cost is probably going to be, again, at least £20,000, possibly even 30, then you start to see that the costs are going to multiply and escalate. Then if you start to think about reputational damage, maybe lost revenue from customers that might start to impact. Now we start to see that there are layers upon layers upon layers of potential cost. So when you quote 5 times, it might seem high to start with, but it doesn't take you long to see that actually 5 times could be conservative. It really could be.
And I guess a lot of businesses might not be able to quantify that, might they? But I guess flipping it on its head a little bit then, because we're aware of what bad hires look like, aren't we? And we're aware of the negativity you talked a lot about. Then the cost of that, one of which is those really great people leaving. When we take on a brief, often it'll start with, here's exactly what I don't want, because this is what we've felt from someone who wasn't right. But do you think it's fair to say that we tend to underestimate the value, the actual value of a great hire? And if so, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but why do you think that is?
I do think people underestimate the value that a great hire can have. And there's a couple of reasons for it. I do think human beings are wired to identify pain more than opportunity. So we'll understand and be more aware of costs than we are of opportunities and benefit often. But I also think there are a number of reasons why a great hire can have potentially more value than a poor hire can cost you. But we're less wired to see it. And part of it is that the great hire will, yes, deliver better performance themselves, but they'll also have an impact on the team around them. So instead of reduced productivity, which you get from a bad hire, you actually get elevated productivity in the people around a really good hire, a superstar, if we want to call them that. But actually, part of the value comes because you'll get rid of a bad hire relatively quickly, hopefully within a few months. But even if they're with you sort of 9 or 12 months, that's a relatively short period of time. A great hire can keep delivering for years and years and years. And actually, that their influence could be elevated even further if they get promoted, if they have therefore an influence on more of the people within the organization. They're able to elevate the performance of a wider section of the organization. That's when you start to see the true benefit of this really great hire. And that, because there's so many layers to that and so many dimensions to it, that's probably more difficult to conceptualize than the cost of a bad hire.
You say it's difficult. I mean, can we quantify it? Are we underestimating the contribution of top performers? Is there a way of looking at that in the same way as we have done with the cost of bad hires?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, research really helps in this respect. So if we just looked at productivity, an individual's productivity and their own contribution, research tells us that they're probably 4 times as likely to deliver performance, or they're likely to deliver a factor of 4 higher, so 400% of the performance of an average person. But if it's a really complex role, it could be as much as 8 times just in their own performance. So if we looked at the fact that a bad hire can kind of cost you 60% in terms of performance, and a great hire is going to deliver 4 times 400%, or even 800% if it's a complex role, then we can see one dimension alone can be incredibly valuable. And then if we start to look at the fact that this compounds over time, and if they're with us for longer, they're likely to deliver more than that because they're with us for longer, then we can start to see how numbers and metrics can align back to this.
So I suppose if people listening, they're going to say, well, 4 times or 8 times productivity. That almost sounds unbelievable. What does that look like in practical terms in the real world then in our businesses?
Well, if I will often ask leaders, tell me what you see in your very, very best people. What do you see in them? What do you hear from them? What do you see in their choices and behaviors? What do you see in the impact that they have on the people around them? And just get it down to some really visceral, tangible things that we see and hear from better people. And if we start to cue into that, we don't need to wait for the numbers in terms of the KPIs. We will already know that they're a better operator. And if we start to then follow that through, we can start to look at the impact they might have on problem solving within the organization. Are these people that can identify problems quicker? Can they identify those problems, those issues that we have in the business that cause us the biggest problems, the most significant challenges? Can they start to solve those problems? Can they engage a group of people around them to start solving those problems? And if we identify things sooner and we can get better outcomes and we can engage a team on finding solutions, surely that's going to have a huge knock-on impact to our performance and our results. So when we start looking at what those better people in our organization actually do on a daily basis, the conversations that they might start, the thinking that they might start driving, the outcomes that they start driving, then we can understand this on a more sort of tangible day-to-day level than just thinking about it through the lens of numbers.
And I guess rather than just looking through the lens of that one person being really good, is that what you're saying? You're sort of saying the knock-on effect of them for the wider business. It becomes more of this sum of all the parts that people talk about.
Absolutely. And when we ask these sorts of questions about, take a sales role, for example, there might be a more obvious way to see somebody's performance. When I started looking at these sorts of questions, I was looking at it through the world of elite sport. And it's quite easy to see performance and contribution in that environment. It's also quite easy to understand the cost, because maybe there's a huge transfer fee involved and a mega salary involved. And if somebody's not performing, you'll see it, on the field, as it were. It'll be there for all to see, and it'll be very, very public. But there's a version of all of that for people within our businesses. And probably the deeper question and the deeper principle that sits underneath this is about differentiating between performance management and results monitoring. Because if we are really cued into performance management, we understand what high performers, medium performers, low performers look like and sound like when they're just going about their daily business in the organization. If we're at results monitoring, we have to wait until it turns into a KPI to understand it.
So as a football fan, I guess football teams don't look at it as then like we've got a vacancy in the team, have we? And can we get a bum on seat? Someone once said to me, if it's a bum on seat you want, and the bum on seat is what you get. Is that where you're obviously making the point, I guess, but the recruitment's a bit more than just filling a vacancy, is it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think many of the really great organizations that I've encountered, not only have they got their eye in to understand what a really successful person looks like and how to recruit a really successful person when they do have a role, they're actually pretty proactive in their recruitment. They're already looking for people who might well fit with this organization, and they become a magnet for talent proactively, so that whenever they do have a role, all of those people who would be a great fit are kind of interested. And they're looking at this organization thinking, if there's ever a vacancy there, I'm going to apply. They've created a queue outside of the door, as I describe it. They've become that place that really great people want to be and want to work with.
So the magnetism bit is quite key here then, I suppose, isn't it? Because you've said in the past that most hiring mistakes happen before the interview even takes place, which I guess would be a struggle conceptually for people to get their heads around. So what do you mean by that?
Well, there's a couple of elements to that. The first part of it is we have to understand what great people look like. We have to understand the kind of people that we want to attract, and the kind of people that we want to work here. And if I read through job ads, for example, and I see roles, sort of role definitions and descriptions, and I see people's definitions and descriptions, or the description of the person that we want here, they don't tell me a lot about the person often. So how likely are we to get a queue of the right people if we don't really understand what the right people look like? And when I talk to leaders within organizations about, tell me about the kind of person that would be absolutely perfect here. But I'm talking about the kind of person, don't just give me the qualifications that they need. Don't just give me the experience that you'd like to see on the CV. Tell me about the person that's going to be successful here. Sometimes they don't really understand it. And I see that expressed in a couple of different ways. If I say, tell me about the kind of person that you want, some leaders will give me 50 or 60 desirable characteristics. And the truth is, you're not going to find anybody with all 50 or 60 desirable characteristics in abundance. You're not going to find it a superhuman. So if we then start to understand what's really important, what do we really need in this person? And there'll be a combination of what's important for the organization in any role, and also what do we need for this role? So that really sharp focus is key. But also we've got to become somewhere where great people want to be, to have that queue outside of the door, and have a queue of the right people outside of the door who are all waiting for this opportunity to arise, this vacancy to arrive, and then they'll be banging on the door.
So it isn't necessarily, I guess then, is it not necessarily to do with some business leaders' ability at interviewing per se? Because I meet a lot of people who, they've been in business for a number of years, and I've been there as well, where I quite fancy myself at interviewing. I think, I've made some great hires along the way. So it's not necessarily that then, is it? Whether you're good or bad at interviewing, it's more, is it about what it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it. But even the best interviewer in the world, if you've got kind of the best of a bad bunch in terms of the candidates in front of you, even if you're a great interviewer, you're not going to hire a great person. So we have to make sure that all of the candidates in front of us are really good, or that we've got enough really great candidates that we can start to then assess which one we want to select out of them. And the interview part of it is part of it. The interview element's part of it. And I think there are some business leaders who are really good at interviewing, and some who do have. So I understand intuition as a form of knowledge, but it's probably not knowledge that we can express clearly. We don't really know how we know, but we do know. And that's part of how we learn. But it's not easy to take that intuitive knowledge that we've got and give it to somebody else. It's very difficult to systematize that. So whilst a senior leader in a business might be really, really good at interviewing, how do we make sure that everybody who hires across this business is really good at interviewing? Because we can't sort of like extract that intuition from you and give it to others. So we need a way to help them understand whether the person in front of them is a great hire. And not just from the CV and not just from a set of questions that we might ask them, but by understanding the person in front of us, not just the qualifications, the CV, or their ability to respond to some probably pre-written, predetermined questions, but actually to get under the skin and understand what kind of human being have we got here.
So when we're doing that, when we're interviewing people, what have you found that organizations or people are typically looking at that really they shouldn't be?
One of the big traps, I think, is that we focus too much on somebody's ability to develop rapport. And if we get on with them in the interview, we might mistakenly say that that's a good cultural fit. Now, to me, a good cultural fit is somebody who lives the values that we aspire to and recognize. But just because somebody develops rapport and they can have an easy conversation with you and get on with you and maybe even get on with a team, it doesn't mean that they've got those critical characteristics and they live them on a daily basis. I mean, if we think about honesty as a characteristic, if you meet somebody and they meet the team, maybe you go down the pub or whatever and have a pint with them, or you have an interview and you seem to have a relatively easy conversation, does that mean they're an honest person? If courage was really important to you, does that mean they're a courageous person? If resilience was really important to you, does that mean that they're a resilient person? And the likelihood is it probably doesn't tell us anything about the really important characteristics that we need. So we tend to over-bias on that sort of ability to develop rapport, and probably not really focus on the truly important characteristics that are going to enable somebody to be really successful in this role and in this organization.
I suppose then applying that into, say, the world of football, for instance, what they don't do is interview someone and say, give me an example of when you scored a great goal under pressure. You know, they've witnessed it, haven't they? So you're known, obviously, for applying the lessons of elite sport into business, and some of the examples you give make me chuckle to myself, actually, at how stupid we've been. So what is it that world-class sporting teams understand about recruitment that us in the business world miss out a lot on?
Well, whether they're world-class sports teams or whether they're world-class operators in their field, they all test for these characteristics. They make people demonstrate these characteristics. They're looking for evidence that people have got these characteristics. And you're right, what they're not looking for is somebody to tell them that they've got it. You know, if you ask somebody about courage, they'll probably tell you a story. They'll tell you about a time when they were courageous, which may be true, it may be accurate, it may not be. It might be their own, it might not be. But that's what you're going to get back. And with many of these processes within an interview process, we ask a question, we'll get an answer back. Equally, it doesn't mean the person would do what they said. It just means they know that that's the right answer. And so world-class organizations and those that I work with in elite sport are looking for evidence that the person in front of them has these characteristics that they're alive and well, and that they will see them consistently, and they will probably see them under pressure.
So that, I suppose, and to my example, you can obviously watch someone go and play football or whatever, can't you? You can't always do that then in the business world and go and watch somebody at their desk do something amazing. So it might sound a little bit intangible to some people, and they might argue, well, talent surely is still the most important thing, isn't it?
Well, talent, as we understand it in sport, talent will kind of put you on the start line, but it doesn't tell you much beyond that. Within elite sport, and lots of the clubs and organisations I've worked with are well aware that, for example, in football, there are lots of players who are good at kicking footballs. The question is, are they the kind of player that we want? Are they a professional? Do they drive their own improvement? Are they the player that's going to be knocking on the door of the coach or the strength and conditioning coach or the analyst because they really want more information, feedback, input to get better? Are they really hungry about driving their own improvement? Are they a good team player? They might be good at kicking footballs, but are they a good team player? Because we want good team players. So they'll understand exactly what they need and what they're going to look for in these people beyond the talent. And particularly in elite sporting environments, we know that the ability to kick a football is important if you want to play elite level football. But the other stuff is going to dictate whether you're successful over the course of the long haul. And that's what we're really interested in.
So in that, there's a load of characteristics, isn't there? And you talked about that a minute ago, that we in business probably list out 50. Can you give us an example that might be relevant, I suppose, from one of the elite teams that you've worked with, and the sort of characteristics that they're looking for?
Yeah, one of those central characteristics is the ability to drive your own improvement, and not be reliant upon the coaches or the sports scientists or the medics or whoever it is that's around you, but you be in the driving seat. And that requires a real awareness about how you're performing at the moment, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you're working on, but also then the ability to go and improve it on your own, make it better. So if we were looking at academy level footballers, we'd be looking at the ones who were not just knocking on the coach's door, but also taking a bag of balls and a bag of cones out onto the field before anybody else had got there, because they know they need to practice free kicks with their left foot or whatever it happens to be, and that they're active in that process. They're not passive. So we actually described it within an elite football academy setting. This was at FC Bayern Munich. We described it by creating a conveyor belt, and we created a visual out of this. So we had a conveyor belt and we had Sabutio players. Do you remember Sabutio? Little plastic figures. And we said, there's a conveyor belt here, but there's a gap between the end of that conveyor belt and our first team. And what many people will do is they'll stand on the conveyor belt, they'll reach the top, and then they'll fall onto this pile of discarded players. That is the 90+%, probably 99% of players who come through academy systems and never make it. Now, over here, we've got the first team, and we had a picture of the Allianz Arena all lit up. And we said, so how do you bridge that gap? And they were saying, well, on that conveyor belt, if you just stood there, you'd fall off. But if you ran and jumped, you'd probably make it. Okay, so what does running and jumping look like? And we created that understanding with them that standing on the conveyor belt is akin to turning up. So there's a practice session, you turn up, you do what you're told, you go home at the end of it, you eat what you're given. When the strength conditioning coach tells you to pick up some weights, you pick them up. If the physio tells you to do some stretching, you do some stretching. That's standing on the conveyor belt. That's going to land you on the 99% pile. If you're going to run and jump, what does that look like? And then they started to say, I probably have to be turning up early, and I'd probably have to be actively working on the things that were going to improve me. I'd have to do more than everybody else around me. Yeah. So we kind of built it into a way that they could understand what that looks like on a daily basis. Now, again, if we take that out of football and say, well, what would that look like in your organization? What are the kind of people that you want to be employing? And that might be a central characteristic, the ability to improve yourself. You might have others that are really important, but if we can make it really tangible so that we know what it looks like and sounds like, then we can start to create conditions where we can test for that. We can make people demonstrate that characteristic, and we can see the evidence that they really are living this characteristic rather than hoping that they've got it.
So these people that we want, you mentioned it earlier and you've talked about it a lot, a magnet for that talent. Magnet for talent is sort of the strapline that you use. What does that really mean?
That means really understanding why great people, the kind of people that you want to recruit, would want to work for your organization and do these roles, the roles that you're advertising. Why would they queue up outside of your door? What's going to make you the place that all of these great people want to work? And when I ask business leaders that, they often struggle with that question. And I often give them examples of really great organizations, like, if you're a pilot in the Royal Air Force, you'd probably want to fly for the Red Arrows. If you were in the British Army, you might want to be in the SAS. If you play rugby in New Zealand, you'd probably be wanting to play for the All Blacks. And so, I can give some marquee examples like that. And there's an obvious reason why, if you were growing up in New Zealand as a young lad and you wanted to play rugby, the All Blacks would be the team you wanted to play for. But if we use that same base question, what would make somebody want to work here, to do this stuff with us, to do that job with us? If we can get under the skin of that and start understanding why really great people would want to do that, then we can start figuring out how to create this magnetism. Because then all we need to do, once we've got that, is make sure that we communicate it in a way that they can pick it up.
Because businesses, I think it's fair to say, on the whole, we struggle to attract great people, don't we? So that magnet bit is harder at times because we're not the All Blacks, we're not the Red Arrows or things like that. But when it doesn't work out, then what do you find people actually, what do they blame?
They can blame all sorts, honestly. So the market is one of those. The fact that it's either employees or an employer's market. They would blame the fact that they haven't got enough resource to be able to throw huge salary or benefits packages at this. They might blame the overall brand of the company and the employer brand that they're not in control of. They could blame all sorts of things. But beyond all of that, if you think about why people want to work for certain organizations rather than others, or work for certain people rather than others, there's often a really human dimension to that. They respect these people. They respect this organization. The organization gets known on the grapevine as one of those places that you'd really, really want to be. And that doesn't require huge resource. It doesn't require massive salaries. It doesn't require a new brand or anything like that. It usually requires you to be really good at what you do and be known as somebody who's really good at what you do. And word usually gets round an industry really quickly if there are good operators in the market. Usually they're also people who look after and respect their employees. And it doesn't take long, I found, for that word to get onto the street. You usually have to be doing really good things for a sustained period of time, a year, 18 months, whatever it is. But when you do, those ripples end up kind of emanating out into the world.
And a year, 18 months, I'm sure people listening, I haven't got that long, Simon. Good Lord, the whole world will have changed in that time. What's the one thing we could do tomorrow to become more attractive as an organization to these high performers that we want?
Well, the easy win that most people actually aren't accessing at all is to start actually talking about the great stuff that you do. I've come across loads of organizations who are already doing really, really good things. They're just not talking about it. They're not sharing it with the people who might be interested in working for them. That's the easiest win of all. And then if we figure out that we're probably not the finished article, there's probably some improvements that we want to make to the organization so that we become a place that people want to be. And we can keep communicating that as we go. Sometimes that comes in the form of awards and things like that. Sometimes it's just reputation that starts to emanate out into the world. But there are some really easy wins there that can get us off the blocks.
And if we can do something like that, we can, sit down with our team, sit down with our marketing department, get it out there about how good we are and what we're doing, and people that might want to work for us need to hear about this. You've then worked with organizations of all shapes and sizes, I guess. I mean, so if you were walking into a business tomorrow and you could only then change one thing about the way they recruit, what would that be?
Well, it'd probably be to just take a look at the things they're already quite good at and the things that they're missing a trick on at the moment. And it might be that they haven't quite got their eye in on the kind of characteristics that they need in their people. And maybe a sharper focus on that would allow everything else to work. It might be that they've got most of the pieces in place, but they need to become more of a magnet for talent and attract more of the right people. Or it might be that they're actually getting some good candidates in, they've got a sharp eye on what they need, but they're not testing it properly. And in some cases, they're doing quite a lot of that well, but they're then not going the final stage, which I call turning starters into superstars. They're not linking the recruitment process into the ongoing development of that person and the organization. Because for me, that they shouldn't be separate processes. There should be a really seamless link between the recruitment process, the probation or sort of induction and early onboarding process, the development process of that person onto their ongoing progression within the business, succession planning, etc.
Which sounds really nice and simple, doesn't it? And you do this a lot to people where we all have the little light bulb above our head and we go, oh my God, why didn't we think of that? But why is that? Why are we getting it wrong?
Well, lots of larger organizations are pretty disjointed because they've got different people focusing on different things. And what they haven't really done is joined all of those things up and enabled the whole team to understand the whole journey and to work on making it as seamless as possible. So they've got somebody focused on recruitment, they've got somebody focused on development, they've got somebody else focused on succession planning, they've got somebody else focused on induction, and therefore they've just got these pieces of the jigsaw that don't really join up with each other. So having a team approach on this, I think, is usually the easiest way to get in amongst it and start turning the dial.
Right. One final question from me then, Simon, before we go to a bit of Q&A. If people have got to leg it, that's fine. But if you want to stay on and just ask some questions of Simon, then fingers at the ready. But if somebody wants to take one thing away from this today, what should it be?
I think the one question that probably would give people the greatest benefit from today is to just start realizing the difference between the cost to you of a bad hire and the benefit of a really great hire. And just start, if you can, put that into financial terms. And if we can start to understand that our bad hire probably is going to cost in excess of £100,000, and our great hire could be worth probably in excess of £250,000, probably towards towards £500,000 on a regular standard middle manager's £45,000-50,000 a year salary band. If we can understand that's the difference, then we start to figure out that even if hiring great people takes a bit more time, takes a bit more thought and a bit more energy and requires a bit more from us, it's absolutely worth it, because we could be talking about £500,000 worth of difference.
There we go. Right. Okay. So we've covered a ton of ground here. We've talked about the cost of a bad hire, the value of a great one, some of the mistakes that we're all making when we're trying to I suppose, identify and then attract these high performers. There's probably things that we've touched on that you'd like us to explore in a bit more detail. So we'll open up to questions now. If you've already put a question into the chat, thank you. We'll work through as many as we can in the time we've got left. But feel free to add it now. Simon, if you're ready for all of that. We've got one here, a bit of a caveat to it, so I'll try and get to the question. I suppose this is the bit that you talked about, different interviewers doing different things, really. So can you really make this a repeatable process across an organization?
You can. And when you start to understand that whilst we can still interview people, understanding character and assessing character comes through tests. It's by testing people, putting them in challenging situations and observing the response. That's much, much easier to replicate than the ability to interview people, because whilst asking the questions isn't a particularly difficult part of the interviewing process, understanding the responses, having really good follow-up questions, that's far more difficult to replicate and train people on. So it's actually easier to replicate the testing process that we use for character than it is to develop people as skilled interviewers.
That's a nice segue into the next one I've got here, actually. So can character really be assessed during recruitment? Somebody's a cynic here, Simon.
Yeah. Yes. It's not, nothing's really an exact science, and it's not measurable, in the classic scientific sense and the quantifiable sense. But what we're looking to do is to be increasingly more confident in the decision that we make, because we've got actual evidence. We've seen somebody's response, and it's the difference between asking whether somebody's courageous and seeing what they're like when they're in a position when they're scared. If we put somebody in a position where they're scared and see the response, we're going to know how courageous they are. And it's not a tick box, yes, they are courageous, no, they're not. We're going to see how courageous they are. And if somebody was to then say, well, courage is a really important characteristic in this organization, how confident are we that this is a courageous person? Well, you're going to make that decision with a much greater degree of confidence than if you ask them, tell me about your courage. Tell me a time when you've been courageous, or tell me a time when you've been scared. What did you do? And so it's that level of confidence that's critical here. Being able to make decisions.
Get them to show you something rather than ask them the question.
Yeah. And I use, in all sorts of realms, I use a very, very simple confidence scale. And at the bottom end of the confidence scale is I hope. So I hope this is the right person. I hope they've got the characteristics I need. I hope they're going to be successful here. So hope is at the bottom. And then I think they'll be good. Confident they'll be good. I believe they'll be good. I know. And what we're trying to do is get as close to know as possible. And so the tests that we use and the evidence that gives us, having people who are demonstrating these characteristics gives us a greater degree of confidence than we would have had if we'd have just asked them the question, or give them a sort of a self-report measure where score your confidence on a 0 to 10 scale. Oh, I'm a really confident person, 9.
I've got another one here. Feel free to keep them coming in. We've got a few more minutes for the Q&A. This one's multiple choice for you by the looks of it, Simon. From your experience, what's the biggest hiring mistake senior leadership teams make before recruitment even starts? Is it defining the role, assessing culture, or something else?
Defining the characteristics is probably the missing piece, and that usually is a function of understanding their culture, because if culture is described by the All Blacks rugby team as collective character, so if we think about our culture and then create an individual version of that, so our culture are the values that we all want to live and we all want to see lived. So if we understand that on an individual basis that we need somebody with these values who's living these values, as characteristics, we need somebody like that when we're going to recruit. Because if we don't, we've got somebody who's not going to fit in with our culture. We've got maybe somebody who's even going to be countercultural. So understanding that helps us to understand the organizational characteristics that we might want in our person. We might then have to sort of nuance that a little bit and understand some of the role-specific characteristics that we need for that person to be successful in this role. So understanding the role is important, but when we fuse that together, then we get a set of characteristics that we can go and assess.
Great. I hope that's answered your question, Elizabeth. Thank you for that. Right. So, Simon, if people have found this useful and they might want to explore some of these ideas in a bit more depth, where to start?
So there's a couple of places that we can start. We've got a white paper which sums up the research that we've found and used around how to assess the cost of a bad hire and the benefits of a good one in sort of pound, shillings and pence terms. There's also, if you think it might be useful, there's a magnet for talent little mini course that we've developed, a digital program. So if you're thinking actually we could do with becoming a magnet for talent, that's something that we need to develop in the organization. That's an easy start point. And if you're thinking actually we really need to look at the whole of our hiring process and really get our heads around how to hire on character, we've got a program which is part digital and part delivered through virtual sessions like this, which kicks off in September. And then there will only be a cohort of 12. So if you'd like to be part of that, let us know and we can send you the details.
Super. So thank you for that. So tell us a bit more about that then, if you could, about this online program in a bit more detail.
So I've found I've delivered lots of digital programs over the years that a combination of some digital pieces that you can do from your own desk in your own time, plus live sessions where there's a little cohort and we're working together, studying together, working through practical examples. A combination of those things works really, really well. So that's how we've developed our Hire Great People program. It's based on the 5-step program that I use with all of the clients that I work with Adidas, with FC Bayern Munich, with all of the other organizations. So it's the same process. For ease of delivery, we've boiled it down into a digital program that can be studied and wrapped live support, online support sessions around it. Plus, there's a book that comes with that.
Excellent. Right. So before we go, I'm going to do this as a little admin task, which I've got Sam here beside me overseeing. Then I'm going to drop in your white paper into the chat. We will be sending it round on email as well, won't we, Sam? So I will do that momentarily once I've thanked Simon, really, for your time. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We hope you found the session valuable. We hope you've got plenty to think about. We hope you've had that light bulb moment when it comes to your own recruitment and your hiring decisions. So thank you very much, everyone.